Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. For 20 years, my guest, Lida Cochran, taught in the Department of Education at the University of Iowa. Both she and her husband, Lee Cochran, were pioneers in audiovisual instruction and visual literacy. Lee directed the University of Iowa Audiovisual Center for 46 years. The Cochran Communication Center in Olathe, Kansas, was recently dedicated to Lida and Lee. Over the years, Lida has involved herself in many things. She wrote a historical pageant, one-act plays, read mysteries on the radio, developed a photography business, exhibited her work, traveled worldwide, and was a cable TV producer. She produced a tape on the history of visual literacy, served as president of the International Visual Literacy Association, and she's still active in the organization. In 1984, Lida received the John Debs International Literacy Award, and in 1986, the AECT Distinguished Service Award. Lida is listed in Who's Who of American Women. Welcome to One of a Kind. I know your story begins in Kansas in 1911. Tell me some of the memories of your early childhood in Kansas.
Well, sometimes living in 1996, it's difficult to remember back to a time when there was no television, there wasn't even radio. We didn't have electricity. We had a telephone, and during electric storms, it was on the wall. And during the electric storms, why all these blue lights would clutter around the radio, around the telephone. But we didn't feel deprived.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had no idea of the rest of the world.
In a little town called
Athol.
Athol. Now, where is Athol?
Athol is 17 miles from the geographical center of the United States. This is a picture of it. So that I couldn't have been born any more Midland than that.
And you come from a family of long livers. You've got this British blood in you that lives many years.
Well, I've been very, very fortunate. I had my picture was taken when I was 3 months old with 4 generations. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, and myself. And in that picture, it represents was like my great-grandmother was born in about 1840. And she was married in 1850, celebrated her golden wedding anniversary in 1900. And here I am now living in 1996. It's a rich heritage, and it gives me deep roots in the history of the United States.
Now, your father taught high school.
Yes.
Before he went back and got his master's.
Yes. Yeah, and then he was superintendent of some schools later. But we were living in Athol, and this is where my first memories happened. We didn't have cars. We were dependent on horses and walking, and but we really had fun. As I say, I just remember it very joyful. Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's because I came from I was in a loving family.
Mm-hmm. You had a brother and a sister?
I had a brother and a sister. I was the oldest. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember my parents ever saying a cross word to one another. I know they had differences, but they always settled them quietly among them, between them, and not. We didn't hear any of this.
When did you move to the big city of Topeka?
That was the year after my freshman year in high school. And as it turned out, then I went to 4 high schools in 3 high schools in 4 years.
And where did you go to college, Lida?
At Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas. And was graduated in 1934.
And soon after that, you married your first husband, who...
Before that, I married Harry Myers in 1933. My father was out of town at that time, teaching elsewhere. He had finished his graduate work. And my husband, Harry, or my future husband, had to pay his rent. I had to pay rent at the sorority's house at the university. And we decided it would be cheaper to get married. And so I was married in the sorority house.
And then soon after that, your son was born in 1940?
My son, no, he wasn't born until
1940.
1940. See, this was 33. And but in those few years, I entered into the society, or the culture of Topeka, Kansas, and was active. I loved plays. I was in the plays in college, and we had a civic theater, and so I was active in that. And along came radio. Radio was just really getting a good start in those days, and WIBW didn't hire us. They asked a number of us to put on plays that
you wrote? You wrote the plays?
No, I didn't write those plays. But I made good friends there. It was a lot of fun acting in the plays.
Now, was this when the Kansas Historical Society asked you to write the history of the state?
That was a little later. Well, about the same time. It was all happened there together. But I had written 3 plays commemorating the Kansas Day, which was celebrated in January, and they had a big celebration. Everyone all over the state usually came, and the centerpiece of this celebration was a play. And so for 3 different years I wrote that play, and the director of the Kansas State Historical Society had seen some of those plays. He asked me if I would research and write and direct a pageant commemorating the founding of the Shawnee Indian Mission in Kansas City. And it was Kansas City, Kansas. And I didn't know I couldn't do it. And so I did.
Was this casts of hundreds?
Yes, there were about 300 Indians in it from Haskell Institute. And it was given on the football field there at Olathe. And there were all the high school students that were in it, and my brother, who was a musician, composed original music for the overture to the pageant. And
you really enjoyed that, didn't you?
Yes. Oh, this was fun. I was pregnant at the time with my son, but it still was.
The show must go on.
Yes. So I think I was a little ahead of my time as far as not letting pregnancy deter one from keeping a job.
Soon after that, I know you moved to Seattle. What took you to Seattle?
My husband couldn't take the Kansas summers. He developed blood poisoning and no air conditioning. And so he said, I just can't take this anymore. And I was rather reluctant to leave Topeka. I was Kansas State president treasurer of the League of Women Voters, and very active in politics, and also giving plays, and had a good circle of friends, well known. And I didn't want to leave. But in those days, one followed one's husband. So we moved out to the state of Washington, landed at Richmond Beach, right on Puget Sound. And the little house that we were able to rent, the yard dropped off into Puget Sound. And here was the water coming in, the tide coming in twice every day and going out every day, and I'd read it in geography books, but I didn't really believe it.
Not in Kansas. You just saw that wheat flowing.
Which made me think that that experience is very important in learning.
And is this when you started into your love and doing photography, Lida?
No, not until after the war started.
So your husband went away to the war.
Yes.
And served.
And that's where he'd had a hobby of pottery. He was doing a lot of pottery, and I have quite a few pieces around home yet, that things that he did. But he couldn't carry a kiln around with him in the Army, and he found a buddy, his roommate, that was taking pictures and souping them in the lavatory in the bathrooms wherever they were. And so when he was home on leave, by this time I was living in Los Angeles. And he was in a room in the apartment that we had there, and we hunted all over LA to try to find materials that were very scarce during the war. And when he left, he said, "Now don't you let all that work, those materials go to waste." So I pitched in to learn photography.
In all these years, or I don't know when did you start this wonderful tradition of sending people at Christmas a photograph or a picture that you have shot and then wrote a poem?
Oh, that didn't happen until after Lee's death. I didn't start that. Well, while I was married to Harry, we did send pictures that one year we'd send one of his pictures, and the next year we'd send one of my pictures. These were black and whites, and then we'd write about it just in stories. But he was killed the Christmas of '57 in an automobile accident. And he was a very good driver, but a woman just turned right into him, and he was thrown out of the car. So that meant that I wasn't wedded to Grays Harbor County anymore, which is where we lived after the war. And I went back to school. And
is that when you started your interested in visual literacy?
Well, I really began very early with thinking that words aren't the thing. I mean, they're just a symbol. They just stand for something, and people are thinking that when they say something that other people have the same meaning for that word. And then I began reading in general semantics, and this kind of told me that something about the visual world was very important in communication. And so when later, after I had come here to Topeka, to Iowa City. I get my places all mixed up. And after I'd married Lee and was teaching here at the university, I met Jack Debs, who was created the term visual literacy. And it was his idea that when he was developing how-to programs with pictures and words, for these lesson plans were for the 4-H and Boy Scout groups. And he said, well, when I'm doing this, I'm using a language. These visuals are a language. So he started out saying that pictures had of subjects and predicates and objects, some of them. But then he grew out of that and began thinking that there's something more to visual literacy than that. And he put the idea in my mind about trying to get a grant from Kodak to here at the university to explore how we can prove that there's such thing as visual literacy.
And you applied to Kodak and you won a grant?
Yeah, this was, see, the university applied. It was all through Dean Jones, and I have a picture of a meeting there in his office. And then the check was given to the university, and William Kaufman was the person that was co-directing this with me, and because he was very high in research and in statistics and so on, and I was balancing it off with a different kind of approach to research, and but we worked together very well, and I still see him, and I think he's a great person.
To back up just a little bit, how did you meet your second husband after your first husband died in the automobile accident? How did you meet Lee, who ended up being head of the audiovisual department for, as I said in my introduction, 46 years, and you both had this love of audiovisual?
Yes. And at the time, it just happened that he was making a film on the overhead projector, and I'd done my dissertation on the overhead, using the overhead projector in a psychology course. Oh. And that hadn't been done before. It had been done in mathematics, but not in psychology. So I think it still is, is the only one, probably.
So you met at a conference?
No. My parents were having their 50th wedding anniversary. And I was in the Midwest, and my college, my university there said, we want you to go look at some of the audiovisual centers, because the Midwest is leading the nation in this effort. And so look at what they're doing there. And the first place I walked into was Iowa. And Lee said, you're late. I didn't know Iowa was on daylight time. Nebraska wasn't where I'd come from, where my parents lived. And then he said, do you drink?
Tea, coffee? And you said, oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So he took me out to dinner then, and we really liked each other. I had one up on him, though. He didn't know that I knew who he was. Oh. Because he was very big in what was the DAVI at that time, the Department of Audiovisual Instruction of NEA. And I had seen his picture on the front of the magazine. And here he was surrounded by two women. And I thought, So I won out. And he asked me to marry him by Thanksgiving, and we were married at Christmas time.
At that time, was that the time that Fred Kent was ahead of the photo unit?
Yes.
Most Iowa Cityans know about Fred Kent.
And then Jim Kent took over the photo service there when he left. And Jim is still printing my Christmas cards.
That's with your photographs
with
that
my
you've shot on
yes.
it. Tell me how you got involved in the international literacy program. I know you served as...
Well, this was starting in, well, it started in about '68 and so on. And Jack Debs, again, wanted me to, or suggested that I'd be interested in it. In fact, at the Portland meeting, I presented the idea of our Visual Scholars Program here at the University of Iowa, and had applications so that people there could apply. And I've got two of our visual scholars from that meeting, that time. So, and then it was just something I was very interested in. I felt very much at home, and they were very warm people, exciting people.
Did this take you all across the United States and all across the world, all through the globe?
Well, we've just had, the International Visual Literacy Association has just had 3, now we'll have our 4th symposium somewhere outside North America. Our first one was in Sweden, and then in London, and then in Greece. And that was a wonderful experience in Greece, where we were, I hadn't realized that the Delphi Oracle was on a mountaintop.
I know.
And we climbed, and we climbed, and we climbed. I'd seen these pictures of the different chambers, and so on, all labeled and all flat on a page. Well, they go straight up. And a beautiful view, though. There.
Isn't it?
And the next one will be in the Netherlands.
And when is that?
That will be in May.
Will you be
this
going,
year.
hope to go to that?
I'm just not sure yet. I'll just have to see.
What were your what did you teach at the university? Exactly, what were your
Well,
courses?
I started out teaching audiovisual instruction, selecting and using audiovisual materials. And then I taught to the teacher kind of production of photographic things, or things that for projection. And my other course was non-projected materials, making these. Because we had to make things then. This is early 60s. I started teaching at the university in 61. And there just were not the things that we have now to use it to make life easy in copying and in typing. You know, it was very laborious kind of thing to get anything done on paper.
When did you do your history video of visual literacy?
I just finished that last fall. Showed it at our meeting in August. It was in October in Chicago.
And then was this kind of a natural thing for you to, when cable television got started, you produced a show for cable television. Tell me about this.
What I was doing, the really important work I think I did at the university was with a class called Film in the Classroom, in which my students went into Sabin School and helped the young children begin to communicate visually. They could draw, they could take still photographs, they could use a movie camera, they could do animation, they could, we even had videotape by that time. So
But they loved that.
Oh, they were most exciting. And you see, we taught them a lot of things beside just the use of the equipment, because this was working together, learning to work as a team, learning to respect others, and whatever they were doing, they had to research it and find out and write it out to make their plans, and make their storyboards and so on for it. But one year we had them solve problems, like we just give them a problem, then use any visual form way you want, and like how many cats can climb a tree, and what would happen if a cat in your living room changed into a horse. You know, some kind of silly things that the children would enjoy doing, and they had great fun with that. And then I had the Visual Scholars Program, in which the people that were getting the stipends as scholars were taking courses all over the campus. This was a truly interdisciplinary program. And the people on our advisory committee were from all the other different disciplines on campus. And our students were making out their own schedules of what they were interested in doing and to meet their goals, and working with these other professors on campus. And then some of the courses that I was teaching were connections, in which we were looking at the history of the world and showing connections a la Burke, and some other things of that kind that were kind of overall seminar kinds of things.
I know I read that you retired in 1981, but you haven't been retired. You've been busy.
I haven't been paid.
Yeah, I know it, but tell me about your Iowa City involvements. I know you've been involved with Access Television, broadband telecommunication. Tell me a little bit about your Iowa City involvements.
Well, most of my work has been outside of Iowa City, so that I feel that I don't know people in Iowa City as well as I would like to. It's just that I've had these other things that I was doing that involved other areas, and that's taken most of my time. But I am a member of the League of Women Voters now here, and also the United Nations, and I think that that's very important. And the other work was with cable television. I was on the board of the school the community schools when that was formed, and trying to get use of that channel by students in the schools. I thought, what a wonderful resource this is, and I was just wishing that we'd had that kind of a resource when I was teaching it with my students at Sabin.
And you love to travel, don't you?
Yes.
You've traveled a lot, and you did even one show about your work traveling to see the whales.
Oh, well, this was a trip along the Baja coast, and our fishing vessel, quite a large schooner kind of thing, dropped anchor in a lagoon where the gray whales migrate and spend from about February through maybe April. Some of them give birth to the new whales, and then this is a warm water area that rather shallow, and so that it's safe for the babies. And they seem to enjoy having people there, and we went out in little boats. And,
with your camera, of course.
Oh yes, and my son-in-law had a video camera. And I had a movie camera at that time too, and so we put together a tape of showing us touching whales and all these beautiful, beautiful animals. It was very thrilling to be right out among them.
My last question, Lida, looking back in your very full life, who had an influence on you? Who influenced you?
I think my mother and father.
Why?
Well, just in the way they treated their children, and they really installed the idea in me that I could do anything. And you see, there wasn't anything around me then to show that I couldn't. So that's why I could do that pageant, I guess. And things that I've tried to do, things that I really couldn't do, but I tried to grow into them then. And they've given me a feeling for caring for other people, and caring about other people, and being sure that you don't ridicule or put others down.
So you in turn could parent that way to your son.
Yes. Yes.
And
I think he did the same with his children.
he has how many children?
He has a boy and a girl.
And they're
in the 30s now.
And they live near you?
No, one of them. My granddaughter Kelly was here last year getting her master's at the university. But she finished in August and has gone back to South Carolina where she's teaching. My grandmother was a teacher, and my father was a teacher. I was a teacher. My son was a teacher, and his daughter's a teacher. So
what a wonderful tradition. And Lida, thank you for being my guest. I appreciate you telling your story. My guest on One of a Kind has been retired College of Education faculty member Lida Cochran. The Cochran Communication Center in Olathe, Kansas was recently dedicated to honor her and her husband, Lee Cochran. They both were pioneers in audiovisual instruction and visual literacy. A recipient of both an International Literacy Award and a Distinguished Service Award, Lida, since her retirement, has kept active and involved. Lida Cochran is one of a kind.